You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Hello? Is that the famous astronomer, Sir Patrick Moore?
It is, very much so.
Any news on the space front?
Quite so. Elon Musk has just designed and developed 5 gigantic, state-of-the-art rocket ships. All members of Parliament, along with the American Senate, have first-class tickets aboard them, you see. They're told they're going to the moon.
Told? Where exactly are they going, Sir Patrick?
The new anomaly discovered recently astronomically.
Welcome to Twin Souls. Twin Souls is brought to you in association with the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Your hosts, Phillip and Ronald Kinsella. Now, today our guest is Chris Meek, who is the creator of the Scottish Paranormal podcast, SPP. And we're delighted to have you on board, Chris. Welcome.
Welcome. Delighted to be here. Thanks, Ron. Thanks, Phil. Good to see you.
You know, we've seen a lot of your podcasts that you run, and they're very interesting because you kind of like have a diverse, kind of like view on the paranormal. But first of all, we want to ask, how was it that you got involved with the paranormal? What was it that got you really interested in it?
Well, I think like everybody else who's in this field, it's probably started from a very young age. Mm-hmm. So I used to have the blue kind of unexplained binder books that everybody collected back in the day, and a lot of kind of other things as well, like just following kind of UFO documentaries and books, and that was kind of where it was contained, just from reading books, documentaries, and things like that. But I think probably the interest spurred well back in the day, where we had a bit of kind of paranormal activity in the house I used to stay in. So it kind of started from there. I don't know if you want to go back chronologically and go through.
Yes, please do. I did wonder, because it's usually is some kind of activity or a sighting or something that spares a lot of people's interest. So this will be interesting. Yes, please, Chris.
Yeah. So this short story I'll tell you now wasn't from a recollection from myself. It was from like members of my family. So when I was younger, right back in probably under the age of 3, 4. I used to see someone. So this was relayed by family members. So it'd be relayed by my mum or my sisters when I was a bit older. So it's no recollection that I have personally, because I was too young at the time. But they stated that I used to claim to see somebody. So I would see somebody in my room. I would see somebody when I was going to bed at night, sometimes during the day, but it'd be the same person. So it would be to the point where it didn't seem like an imaginary friend or anything like that, because it did freak my mother out, and she kind of got a bit of a kind of scare with it, because I was describing the same person. It wasn't like an imaginary friend. It was like a man. It was like a man in a suit. I described it with a man, like a tall man in a suit with dark glasses and a bonnet. So like in Scots term, a bonnet would be a hat. You know what I mean? So I'm not claiming this is the hat man and anything like that. It was just a case of it was a man. It was a man in a dark suit, dark glasses, and a hat. My mum used to always think it was potentially could have been my granddad or something like that, who died before I was born. But don't know. I mean, I would like to really delve into that at some point, maybe, and find out what it actually was. I mean, even at one point, maybe I was even thinking recently getting regressed and see if it was a thing, if it was an imaginary friend or anything like that. So that's kind of where it started when I was younger, and that was like some of the stories. But it did really scare my mum sometimes, because I would say it was either here or there or in the room with us and all that kind of stuff. So it must have been prominent enough for them to actually bring it up in my older years and tell me.
Yes. Yeah. Something similar, I will say, that happened to us when we lived on the property of Bignell House. Our mother, we wouldn't have remembered this, but it's such a similar thing. When we were tucked up in bed, it was just me and Phillip in the house with our mother, and it was a huge cold cottage. She used to light the fires in there to keep us warm. There was no one else. It was off-road. She would hear people running up and down the corridor in the dead of night, and she'd come up to give us a good hiding and found us tucked in our beds. And so that did scare her to a degree. So sorry to interrupt, but that's fascinating.
No,
the similarities.
No, feel free to interrupt whenever. I mean, it's fine. It's good to kind of share insights and stuff in that.
I think myself personally, before we go on, I think it's very interesting because, although there are diverse ranges within the field of paranormal research, as you know and we know, and many others in terms of spirit communication or spirit sightings or ufology or cryptozoology, it is interesting to note that a lot of people who are, like yourself, a researcher and an explorer in these territories, that there has been something that compounded that belief and that interest from an early age. And I think that it's important when we deal with elements of the paranormal, what we call paranormal, which is probably quite normal. But I think and feel that that's interesting. So after this, I mean, it could well be, because normally with this type of thing, it is a relative or someone that was linked to the family, probably bygone years. But then what happened then, Chris, with regards to your moving forward in this fascinating subject?
So just even on that, I mean, even on, like, for me, not having recollection of it, but then thinking what it could be, right? And then where you think, obviously, over the years, we've all kind of made assumptions, or we've maybe had some type of assumption of, like, some kind of train of thought we go down, or what we kind of believe and what we've read through the years. So you read a multitude of different stories and a multitude of different things connected with it. So you make up kind of assumptions in your own head of what you kind of believe or what it could potentially be. So there's a number of different things, I mean, reading through the years. So you get, obviously, in more recent times, you get like the Hatman stories. You even get stories, things like people coming back. Like if you look at like things like Robert Monroe, for example, when he was experiencing seeing people, it was actually himself further down the line coming back. And you get all the different things, so it'd be interesting to actually find out what it was. I mean, or you get obviously visitations for other things, or it could be a dead relative or whatever. I'm not saying it's any of these things. I'm just saying it'd be really, really interesting to find out actually what it would be. So that was one thing. But if I got regressed, I think I'd probably go back to find out what that was. If that was, but that was kind of one of the things start off with. As I said, I had no recollection of it. It was just passed down for family stories. One of the kind of we moved house when I was younger. And we stayed in a town called Armadale. It's basically right in the middle between Edinburgh and Glasgow. I'll try and slow down when I speak, so if I talk too fast or if it's unclear, just let me know.
No, you're doing fine.
So
fine, Chris.
It's kind of a small kind of mining town in between Edinburgh and Glasgow. And we stayed in a semi-detached house, but I had 3 older sisters, mum and dad stayed in the house, and pets and stuff like that. And I always had a kind of intense fear in that house. Just at night, I couldn't sleep with the light, the light off and stuff. And I don't know why. It was just a feeling of the place. There was always things that kind of happened in the house as well. So there was like going to maybe one of the first ones, recollection. When I started the podcast, the reason I started the podcast was mainly because of this kind of house. And a few other things as well, mainly about the whole kind of history, just different things I've been into. But I was going back and asking my sisters and stuff like that about some of the stories that they could recollect and stuff. And some new things popped out that I didn't even remember. There's one of the main stories which I'll tell you, which is one of the craziest stories I've heard. But there was a few other things in between. So my sister came home from school one day. She was maybe about 14. And she was home early, nobody else in the house. And she was either getting herself a drink of water in the kitchen at the sink, and somebody grabbed her from behind, and she thought it was my other sister playing a prank on her or trying to have a joke, and she turned around to probably tell her in no two very good certain terms, maybe an ex-mum or something like that. Turned around and there was nobody there. It was a definite grab. Somebody grabbed her on the shoulder. So she got that much of a fright. She went out of the house and she just sat on the step and she wouldn't go back in the house. So when my mum came home for work, she asked her what had happened, and she explained the story and stuff like that. And my mum had told her, she says, well, it's happened to me a few times as well in the house, where I've been grabbed or like tapped or things like that. And she was, I wasn't the one to tell anybody though, because I didn't want to feel crazy, or if you think I was or just making it up or whatever else. So that was kind of one of the kind of stories in there. Another one as well, which my sister told me, where she was in one downstairs bedroom and she heard my mum scream, who was in the living room. And she went into the living room and there was nothing there at the time. But what my mum had said, there was like if you remember the story correctly, there's like a black mass had came out the floor and then passed into the next wall. So like whatever it was, and she screamed, "Had you seen this thing?" And it passed into the next wall. And so there was things like that happened throughout time. One of the main things I could remember growing up in there is that we used to think we had a prowler, right? Because my dad was a long distance lorry driver, so he was away between like Monday morning, came back on a Friday night. So it was like you've got kind of all the adolescents in the house at that time and stuff. And so I could always remember that there used to be like either you'd think it was like somebody tapping at the window, or there was somebody chapping the door at the back, or even trying the handle on the door at the back door. My back garden had a fence one side, which is at the time it was only about a 4 or 5 foot fence. You couldn't like easily jump over it. You need to like get yourself and climb over it. And the other side was basically it was the same but a large hedge. And then you came to the back of the garden. So if you were in there and somebody opened the door straight away, you get caught. So a few times this happened, and it happened quite regular. And to the point where you could actually hear the spring and the handle going. We got the door replaced at some point, and I had quite a new handle on it, so you could actually hear the actual spring going, kind of the noise. Not a very good noise yet, but that's kind of what you would hear first before you. And you sometimes even seen the handle going to the point where my mum, we had a dog as well, so the dog would actually kind of bark and stuff and go off in one when this would happen as well. So some point we got brave enough to open the door, nobody there. We thought maybe we had a prowler because we had young girls in the house and stuff like that. Mother phoned the police a few times. It got to that point. Never found anybody. But to the point where we kind of got fed up here, as I said, actually opening the door. So when it's seen it happen, I run over, grab the door, nobody there. Dog runs out. There's nowhere anybody could disappear. So you hear these type of stories cropping up time and time again, and a lot of different cases right across the board, the paranormal. And that was just the kind of one of the kind of mad stories that was there. It was just that kind of happened throughout quite a lot of time. So you had that running in the back of your head and other things as well. So so that was kind of one thing. And as I said, with just a kind of ominous kind of feeling in the house, that's what we kind of had.
Yeah.
So one of the kind of crazy stories I knew about the house until I actually started to go back and ask my sisters about some things and stuff was my mum and dad were one night basically. It was like before they kind of split up. They were having a Barney in the living room, a Barney being an argument, and nobody else in the house at the time. The dog was locked in the kitchen, the door shut, and middle of a full heated argument, and the living room door burst open, and a black thing came in. So it was like it's hard to describe it. They said, but my dad said it never had a head, but just like a black mass, like a kind of solid mass. It round his legs, and then over to the couch. And then the story I knew originally was this went round his legs, the middle of heated argument, round his legs, shot across the room, and then disappeared behind the couch. Not long after that, I came home to find him looking around the living room for this thing. And then after that, I just got ushered up to go to my bed or something like that. I could remember it was like it was winter time, so it was still kind of, it was dark, but it wasn't like too late, if you know what I mean. So I'd kind of went up to my room or my bed or whatever at the time when I came home. At the time, I must have only been maybe about 12 when this happened. So that was the kind of story I knew with this thing. And the retelling of the story was, when I heard it, as my mum said, my dad had said, it never had a head. It never had a head. And he was a total skeptic, an absolute skeptic. And this totally like scared him. You know what I mean? It totally did. And the kind of story that when I delved into it a wee bit deeper, I kind of like found some more kind of things out about it. And I knew a wee bit of the story, but where it kind of went, was basically looking at another kind of story in the town recently, and I got a message from an old neighbour about like a UFO sighting. So I was discussing that with her, and I'd asked her about, do you know the story about the black thing? It was my mum's old best friend. My mum's deceased now. So it was her best friend back in the day. And I said, do you know the story about the black thing? And she says, oh, I know all about it. So the story goes where, before I get to this story, my sister had the room next door to the living room. And one night she had her boyfriend staying over. And he had, this got chalked up as a dream, right? It got chalked up as a dream, but he swore it was like it happened. He said like it was a dream, but weird to Kerry say it was to make a point of actually discussing that. He woke up, well, he said he woke up in his dream, right? And had a walk-in cupboard, which was maybe like in the Kerry ex-council houses or council houses, it wasn't like a deep walk-in cupboard. It was maybe about like 400 millimeters deep or like 500, it wasn't that deep. So the doors were open to that. And he'd seen like what looked like a troll-like figure standing in that, which then transformed into like a man. I think the way he described it, if I'm right in saying this, he said it turned like a man stroke wizard type thing and then disappeared. But he chalked this up to a dream. So that's what he said that. But it happened in this room next door to the living room. So when I had discussed it with my mum's old kind of best friend, who stayed right directly across the road for us, the story goes that she had my dad was having an affair, right, at the time. And mum was maybe had an incline or whatever, right? And I think she had a few dreams as well and stuff like that and whatever, right? But apart from that, they'd been away to see, her and her friends had been away to see like a psychic fair type thing. And my mum never got taken that day because I think they were quite busy, but the lady was that good, she invited her back to do a reading at the house one time. This is like maybe Glasgow or something. So it was down the line when this lady came back and invited some friends to the house and stuff. So on the psychic coming to the house, straight away they said there was like some bad energy with the house. We had two really, really, really big rowan trees at the front of the garden. So and there was one at the back of the garden, so it was like in a triangle, right? And these were like massive rowan trees. Rowan trees, if you know them at all, they don't grow that quick. And these were really, really big. So I could remember climbing on them and stuff like that when I was younger, as in them and stuff. And so in some mythology, rowan trees are for to ward off evil. They can be used to ward off evil, right? So that was like one explanation. Other things as well, but I was reading on the net about them as well. Another thing was to ward off changelings for some reason. I don't know. That was just one of the explanations online, because it was seen as like a sacred tree just to grow in mountains and stuff like that. So I've found that quite interesting. So that was maybe something that like it perked interest to the psychic start off with. They had a reading, and the reading in the room next door. At this point, my sister was out the house, and she'd moved in south. The reading next door, and the psychic had relayed to my mum that my dad was having an affair, and she basically explained what his lorry was like, car like, what it looked like, all that kind of stuff, to the point where a lot of things where it couldn't be denied, if you know what I mean. So it was undeniable proof that this lady was saying. She explained quite a lot of things, and I think it was that much she actually said. I mean, quite a lot of psychics usually when they say things like that or whatever, but I think it was that damning that she told her. So it was like the weekend after that, because my dad was away at this point. So the weekend after that when he came back to the house, she confronted him, and then this thing manifested, whatever it was. And the story that my sister said my mother's pa was mixed up with this because she thought she was in the house at this time. I said, no, you'd moved down at this point, so I can remember it, because it was no long before we moved out, so I knew it. But the story that my neighbour, mum's best friend, had told me, which I found quite mad, it was like she said, when it happened, the thing came in, went around your dad's legs and on the couch, and it moved in the couch that fast they couldn't discern what it was. and then it disappeared. And she read another part of the story, said that your dad kind of like got that much of fright and stuff like that. Then he'd actually admitted that he had an affair, or it was in the next bit. They said there was a foul smell for the next room, and they said that they seen like a short man, like a hideous, like short man in another room, and then disappeared. And that part of the story I hadn't heard before. That was a bit coming from the neighbour. And she said after that, like I hadn't been back in your house. And it wasn't long after that. Mum and Dad split up. We actually moved away and stuff like that. So we weren't in the property for that much longer after it. But totally bonkers story. You know what I mean? The thing is, what made it for me is it made it more. Somebody tells you that story, you'll believe them, but at the same time, you'll know yourself. It doesn't. It will not mean as much to you as it will mean because you know the people involved in the story. So you know them. You know. I'm not putting it anybody. You don't believe anybody or their credibility, but you know if it's your mum and dad or whatever. You're like, especially your dad being a skeptic and stuff like that.
Yes.
You know 150% happened. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't the cat. It wasn't like a dog or whatever. Or a passing wind with a small bit of black bag.
I think also, Chris, the interesting thing is that you'll see this. I mean, I've always argued also that, you know, when you have an experience and, you know, you're honest, you're black and white, you're straight with it. When you mentioned also about your sister's boyfriend and, of course, saying that he had this dream and seeing this troll.
That turned into a wizard.
That turned into a wizard thing. You know, I understand that with aspects of the UFO field investigations, you know, we're looking at this in terms of the solid nuts and bolts fashion, but we realize that there is a lot more involved with the phenomena that's linked with psychic links as well too, because the phenomena seems to open up these portals or these gateways of this by strangeness. How fascinating.
I think it's interesting, the troll.
Yes.
And I was quite surprised at that because this is what it does, this kind of force or whatever they are. And I am under the impression myself personally, Chris, that I do think that, I know I'll say this carefully because I don't want to offend anyone in the UFO community, but I do believe that the aliens may be something beyond what they're making us believe they are, that there's something else. They are real. They are real, just as the goblins of old and the trolls are old and the fairies, which I believe are real. But something is using some kind of technique, whether it be mind or, as you stated yourself, which was very interesting, due to circumstances,
building up
of these events, and also the black smoke, the mass. That is incredibly fascinating because I personally have heard people mention what they've seen just recently. Didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Someone stated that there was this kind of hag pushing them down into the bed and it turned into this black mass after they saw this black mass. So this is fascinating. And I'm so pleased, and thank you for sharing that with us, the genesis of your interest in this subject, which is absolutely amazing. And absolutely your father, being an utterly stern critic, I mean, hats off to him because, you know, he admitted, you know, he's seen these things. We can't explain them, but it's fascinating.
And the UFO, you mentioned the UFO, Chris, as well.
So, no, not yet. I've not mentioned that yet.
Oh, right.
We'll get to that.
Ahead of myself.
So, well, I mean, so on that kind of thing, so we had that kind of story. So the UFO story, I did mention a UFO, but it was, I'll come to that. So going through, obviously, there's some chronological kind of story. So that was the one with the whole black, the black mass type thing. That was the main story I knew. But then, obviously, I was asking about the other stories. I found out about the one that came out the floor and passed into the wall. And it was interesting. Like I'd asked a neighbour. I'd said who I knew who stayed in this other house, and I said to him, Did you ever have anything happen in your house? Because we stayed next door and we had a lot of kind of weird stuff happening. And he said, no. And he went and asked his sisters. And he came back and said, no, we didn't have anything. He goes, but we had something in the last house where we had something black standing at the bottom of the bed. And it's like, I mean, every family's got these type of stories that goes on. And I mean, it's interesting. So I after that, we've kind of moved away and then and life goes on kind of thing, you know what I mean? And you tend to kind of forget about them and all the different wee stories. Obviously, that was still there. I was still interested in the paranormal. One of the kind of, when I was probably between 19, 20-ish. I mean, I'd say for around about a year and a half, I got sleep paralysis quite a lot, right? So it started in one property. I used to share a house with a friend. It was his house, and I went through and just kind of rented the room off him. And I can remember the first time I got it. I was roughly about, I'd say 18, 19. And I can remember the first time I got it. I was sitting on a chair watching TV, must have dozed off, woken back up. Classic sleep paralysis where you can't move, you can move your eyes, you can see things, you feel like there's a presence at the side of you, but you can't turn your head. All that type of thing. But I couldn't move. Never seen anything. But you've got that dread and fear kind of feeling that comes with it. So that continued quite a lot. So it continued for about a year and a half between that property and another property I moved to. It was another friend's house and a few towns over. So this first one was a few towns over from me, and then I kind of moved back to the original town I was in, and I shared the house with another friend, and it happened there as well. And I used to tell him this, and he thought I was talking like bull, you know what I mean? So to tell him the story and stuff like that. But sometimes it would be that bad where I would come out it and manage to kind of move my body, and it was like you're getting pushed back down again. And never seen anything, right, until the very end, which I'll tell you about. But I used to get it quite a lot. I used to get it probably either once a week or once every 2 weeks. I used to get it like that much for about a year and a half, quite a lot. And it was mainly, even then, sometimes I used to sleep with the light on, because I used to get it quite a lot. And it was funny because it was only recently I was looking at kind of why this happened. There are a few kind of theories on. I kind of thought, is it place, where it was, and all that kind of stuff. That was one kind of thing I looked at. The other thing I looked at is that was the very, very first time I'd bought a book in astral traveling, and I'd tried it and was unsuccessful, right? And I didn't look at it again. But that's where it started. So I kind of was only recently I was thinking that, but it wasn't actually astral traveling. I just basically I was looking into it. I tried it a few times. Did they work? At the point back then, you're too busy in that, didn't do it. But then that's kind of when it started. So there's another theory which I'll tell you later on, like, because of the place. So in this other property it happened the same regular occurrences. I then moved down south to visit my mum. Got cancer, moved down south, and I went down to kind of visit and stuff. So I was right in the bottom of England in Penzance. So before I went there, I went to visit my other sister who stayed in the local town, and I slept in a settee that night just before I left. So I woke up during the night and I was in the living room sleeping in a settee. I could see the window in front of me with the curtains be slightly, maybe about a 500 millimeter bit in the middle, ajar with the curtains, and it was blinds behind it, but you could see the orange tinge of the streetlight shining through. So if somebody was standing in front of it, you'd be able to see the outline of them, and that's what I seen. I woke up and there was somebody standing there. It was just black. I could potentially make out it was a woman. I thought it was a woman that was just standing, right, a black, wasn't see-through or nothing like that. It was a solid kind of object, somebody standing there. I couldn't move. I had sleep paralysis again. And I was lying side on, and they came towards me and came up to my face. They leaned down and came up to my face, and after that I came out it and it disappeared. It wasn't there. So could you chalk that up to a dream? Could you could easily. I mean, you could rationalise these things and stuff like that and all that. But that is one thing you just put to the back of your mind. You chalk it up to a dream. You don't talk about it. I never told anybody that until like recently. Though I started this actually. And then even like my wife and stuff like that, I never even told about that. And the funny thing was, I went down south and I came back up, and I'd met the friend who stayed in the house, and he said to me, he said, remember when you decorated? I decorated all. I'm a plasterer by trade, right? So I decorated the room and stuff like that. I was in and done it all up and stuff like that, and painted it quite nice, and left furniture in it and stuff. And my friend says, when you left, I moved into your room. And he said, remember, I used to not believe you about the sleep paralysis. I said, yeah. He says, well, when I moved into that, it started happening to me.
Wow, that's really, that is odd. So that's not sleep paralysis. That sounds like something logically, it would be something enforcing its will upon you, and now your mate
in the geographical geographical location of
Yes.
the property, there's some energy or something that's instigating this, or the force or energy is kind of like infiltrating through you and then anyone else that's kind of like receptive to it, I guess, or even though they may not be aware of it themselves. But how fascinating. That's
we
incredible.
do find that with this subject, if it begins when you're young, if it begins,
It follows you.
follows you. It will not leave. And what makes me laugh, what really makes me laugh, is when people continuously debunk it, or they will come up with any kind of rational explanation other than what it could possibly be, which is supernatural. And interesting, Chris, you say about astral travel. I've tried it myself. I failed miserably. I can't get anywhere with it.
Robert Monroe's books, I read them about the interesting and fascinating other dimensional connections that he had. Yes, absolutely. He was a master of the art, wasn't he? Completely. And I must admit, I did have his books and I did try it, but it didn't work. The only time it did work, when I think it worked, although I can't prove it, was one time I saw myself, outside of my bed, but facing the door, the corridor, kind of like coming into my room. And it was dark, but it was lit by a kind of like another type of light. It was very bizarre. Did that happen? I don't know. But anyway, this is intriguing with regards to how you how it all started for you, basically, wasn't it?
So that was kind of just some instances, but a lot of them, they happen, you rationalise them, you move on, and through time, and it's no when you actually start looking back and putting all the dots together and stuff and looking at it. But one of the other ones as well. So that was that one. There was moving on for that. There's other I still was interested in paranormal. Followed it and whatever. But I was I stayed in the next town over when I met my wife, and I used to do a lot of training, running, and things like that. And there was a place called the Bathgate Hills. It's basically, you've got the town of Bathgate, which is in between Edinburgh and Glasgow, and you've got a range of hills above them. They're not too high, they're maybe 1,500 feet high, roughly. And there's like some forestry, country park, and stuff like that running about. So I used to run around the hills and come back just on the road, and sometimes go to the country park and run around the trails. And then one day I was running the road, I noticed it was like a bit I hadn't ran before. There was like a bit of forestry, few hills and stuff like that, and I kind of thought, I could see a trail in it, and I said, I'm going to go in there next time and suss out this area and go for a run in here. So I took the car up, parked up. This is during the day. I'm not looking for any paranormal. I'm not out looking for anything at all. I'm just out for a run. So I run through the kind of grasslandy bit first. It's got kind of shorter trees in it and stuff. I get up to the top of the hill, and there's like a kind of deeper forestry bit, and it's just like a prominent kind of small hill it sits. And it's not a massive area. It's maybe like a couple of miles square in this section, just in this kind of section of kind of forestry and land. And I got to the top bit of the forestry, and something in my head said, don't go any further. I mean, it wasn't a voice in my head. It was just a feeling where it was like, you could chalk it, if I knew then what I knew now. I mean, it was definitely like a kind of Oz factor moment. I mean, I can't remember anything like time standing still or the noise or anything like that, but it was when you're younger, the way I described it before, and this is the way I kind of felt, when you're younger and you've got that kind of feeling where you're more susceptible to maybe picking up feelings and things like that, where you know a bad place if you're in a bad place, and if you maybe get a feeling like that. It was like when you're a kid. I mean, so it was like going back to that again and having that like intense fear of something that you didn't know.
Oh yes. Oh yeah.
It was like exactly like that. And I was out running, and I'm not afraid of a lot of things. You know what I mean? It's a case of like things like that. I mean, I just wasn't. But for some reason, I just didn't want to go any further into this wood. And it was during the day. This is like 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the day. And I kind of thought, like, I don't know. And I cut my run short. And I went back, and I told the wife this at the time. I can remember. And then that was another thing. And we'll come back to this later because there's an add-on to this kind of story, right? Which was only recently. So that area is the Bathgate Hills. Up this area, there's like burial mounds and stuff like that. And there's an old henge up there, right? There's a henge up there that base, not on this hill, and an adjacent hill over for this. I'd never been in this bit of wood before, but at the time, I've been in it since. But the adjacent hill, maybe roughly half a mile away, there's a henge. It was predominantly like an old wooden henge, and it had some kind of stonework in it and burial mounds. It dates back like about 5,500 years. It's like one of the most kind of prominent ones in the area. Sits right on the top of the hill. And so that's kind of what the area is like. So this happened then. It was just so odd because I wasn't out looking for I was out for a run. And this just stopped me in my tracks, stopped me dead. I'd only maybe ran about a mile or something, and it just stopped me dead. And I'm just like, I'm not getting any further, cut it short, went home. And then a week later, I hadn't thought about it again. That was it. You just move on, you're busy. So that was that time. So there's just weird things I was kind of thinking through time that had happened, right?
Yes.
So, when I moved house again back into my old town, moved back to the old town again, round about the same area, there's a cycle path that runs at the top end of town that basically faces south, and it runs like east to west. And basically all the town finishes, and then you've got the cycle track. After the cycle track, it's just like some mossland, maybe some light wooded areas. And then that's it mainly until you hit the next town, which is a few miles that way, maybe like 3 miles that way to the south. If you go the other way along the track, you're coming to a town called Bathgate, which is maybe 3.5 miles that way. So I'm out at night. I used to run at all different times. I'd run early in the mornings, run at night, and stuff like that. So I either had no head torch on, or I've got this kind of old rubbish head torch, which is LED lights, the old LED lights, the diode ones that back in the days. This is more recent. It was probably something like 2010 or 2011. So the one with the wee kind of diodes in them, where it just cast a bit when you're running, you can't see any further with it. And the reason I say this, I'll kind of bring up why the light was more important, but it made me kind of buy a new light after this, right? So I was out running. It was at night. It was roughly maybe about like 9:30ish at night or something. I was running, if not a wee bit later than that. Pretty dark. Can't remember the time of year, but it'd probably been like winterish time, but no snow on the ground or anything like that. But so out running, once you leave the rest of the town, if you imagine the streets, that maybe a bit of kind of fields, and then there's like the streets, you're still getting a bit of light coming off, like the tinge of the orange street lamps and stuff when you're running. You still see a wee bit. So they finish. They're a bit of forestry, not too much, a bit of forestry, kind of woodland, and you're running. So it's like you're into darkness at this point. So I've got this crap light, or I probably had that. It was either that or no light. I'm sure I might have had that light on. So running, and then you come up to a field, large field. It's usually got kind of cattle in it. Sometimes it was empty. This time it was empty. It used to be an old railway line, right? So they ran it on their old railway line, and then they made a new railway line. So this cycle path was like next to the old railway line. So it was slightly elevated in the field, because you can imagine you've got the field kind of lower, the tracks are all kind of made up pretty high. So you're elevated maybe like 4 or 5 feet above the field slightly. And then if you can imagine, so you're on that elevation, a slight slope going down, you've got a fence running all the way along the field. Over the fence, you've got just a row of gorse bushes running along sporadically, not too deep into the field, maybe 3 meters wide for round about the length of the fence. So I know it sounds I'm making going into too much detail, but I'll come apart why. Right? So I'm running, and as I see the field, something takes my eye on the left hand side, and I look over and I see like a red LED, right, in the middle of the field, probably about like 500 meters away, and it's kind of a good bit off. And I'm looking at it, and the first thing I'm thinking of being a runner, I was like, somebody got a dog with a dog kind of an LED collar or something like that in the field, and I'm thinking, I know at the very, very bottom there's a gate. I'm thinking, I hope that gate's shut, because the dog started to intercept me, so it was coming towards me. As soon as I run and I seen it, it was running towards me. Right, I'm saying running, but so this light's coming towards me, and I'm still running. So it cuts across, intercepts me as I'm running, and it's on the other side of the fence. Right, it's only maybe 5 to 10 meters away, and it's keeping speed with me, and it's going behind the gorse bushes. It's like it's dark enough where you can actually see. You can see like different shades of darkness, if you know what I mean. So you can actually see the outline of a dark gorse bush. You can see a fence post. You can see so you're not totally like pitch black. You can't see that. This light is basically going behind gorse bushes, in front of gorse bushes, and it's following me for the speed all the way down. And I'm still thinking, I hope the gate is shut. This dog kind of thing. So what I'm doing, I'm running. I'm not totally looking at it. I can see it. I'm watching it. I'm turning like that as I'm running, and I'm thinking, right, I'm trying to listen for somebody to shout on their dog to come back, right? So I'm listening. Nobody's shouting. So I'm still running. This thing runs with me for probably just under a kilometre, right?
Ah.
And I get to the gate. And I slow down. I see the gate is closed, and I get to it. And I've seen this thing, and it goes behind the gorse bush, and I turn around, and it's no there, right? It's no there. It was just basically a red LED. It was just like a small red LED, right? And I'm thinking to myself, I couldn't mind seen a dog. I couldn't see a dog. This thing was there, and it was passing behind gorse bushes, in front of gorse bushes. Nobody was shouting it, super quiet. I stopped, looked round. This thing had went behind the gorse bush at the last bit. I seen it before I hit the gate, and it disappeared. And I looked round, and I was listening. I stopped and listened. It was just deadly quiet. Couldn't hear nothing, just like the wind a wee bit. And it made that much an impact on me, because I could easily just chalk that up as probably somebody with a dog with an LED. They're probably off, and I'm probably just lost sight or whatever else. I looked, I couldn't see it. It made that much an impact. I ran to the next town, and I went into the next town. I ran back all the street lights, so I didn't need to pass back that big. I never ran there at night again. And I came home, and one of the first things I did is I bought a torch that could be my straight light. Right, that's what I did. And it was funny because I totally forgot all about it. And it wasn't until I was watching, it was a few years ago, when the Skinwalker Ranch program came on, and they were talking about different things. Now, I've heard stories about orbs and stuff like that, right? But they were talking about this small, tiny wee orb that was here in the field next to the cattle, like a small red LED. And I was watching it, and I was like, it just came back, and I'm like, I've seen that. That's what I've seen. I've seen something like that. And I said to the wife, I said, did I ever tell you about that? And she goes, you wouldn't stop talking about it for months. And I couldn't remember that. I mean, I totally forgot all about it until I seen that programme. You can just chalk that up to forgetting about it because you're busy in life and work and all that kind of stuff. But it was just funny that I never remembered that. And I only told my wife about it. And,
that's really spooky. I mean, you know, I've heard of these cases before, especially with the dogmen. Or the werewolves, as people refer to them, but when they see the shapes following them or moving beside them, you know, it's quite frightening. And this is quite also prominent, not only in national parks, but in woodland. Even here. I mean, Paul Sinclair as well, his research into Bempton to do with the wolflands and that, but that's quite spooky, that is.
I think that the lights themselves, interestingly, the different colours of them, because I've argued this with not argued like in an argument, but in a purely, you know, research field, that the colours denote different feelings or energies, and these lights seem to be responsible in a lot of the manifestations that go on. And I mean, I don't blame you. I mean, you know what you saw, and it's not just seeing it and reporting it, it's also how it makes you feel as well too. I mean, if I was you, what is this? I would have taken myself out of that field and away from that area.
But you see, isn't it amazing what your mind does? I understand that. You're trying to rationalize that that is a dog. The first thing, your mind will fight you. Your consciousness will state, no, that's a dog. First of all, then you think, hang on a minute, there's something wrong. And then the irrational takes over, but the rational is combating it. And you're thinking, it's not a dog.
That's weird.
It's weird. It's frightening.
Yeah.
There was nothing else there I could remember seeing. I mean, I kind of thought, right, when I was thinking back, right, you could see the fence post, I could see the gorse bushes. You would have seen a dog if I had a light on. I mean, you would have seen a dog. But all I can remember seeing this light.
Did you hear anything? Did you hear any panting?
No.
Wow. Wow.
And that was it. It was like when I got to the end, it was just deadly silent. And I was still, I mean, initially I was trying to listen for somebody shouting on the dog, come back. Because it was like, if you were in the middle of a field with a dog and it ran for the distance it ran with me, you'd definitely shout it to come back. It ran for like, I'm sure I measured that, and it was something like 750 or 800 meters it ran with me, or ran across in that direction. So I measured that, and I kind of thought it was totally odd, you know what I mean? But that was, I mean, this is spread over obviously a swathe of time. This, and I mean, I was just trying to think back some kind of weird instances that's ever happened, and one of the little ones I seen was before I actually started the podcast. It's a good bit. One of the other ones I seen was we were out fishing one night, and it was kind of light phenomena. But we were out fishing. There's a place called the Lily Log, which is in the same area. It's maybe like 7 miles further west. And during the night, it wasn't too late, but it was like night, right, clear, starry night and stuff. And we'd seen a satellite. There was maybe about 4 of us there, and we'd seen a satellite come across. And it was going like a lot, as you normally kind of see like a bright type satellite. That's what it was. I'm not looking at any usual things, and I'm not the type of person that would instantly think something was a UFO. No, I mean, I do the due diligence and look at what it would be. But this thing was a satellite came across, quite bright, which we just normally thought it was a satellite. And it was coming up, and it was going to cross past with like a star in the sky. And I jokingly said, I said, I wonder what it's going to do. I wonder what it's going to do when it hits that star, right? Because I was going to crash into it, just for a joke. And we're watching it, and it came to the star, and it done a right angle turn. It just basically went, it just done an L shape. So it came across to the star and just went directly the other way. And it was going to see it. It never changed speed. It didn't arc. It just came to that star and just went a different direction, a totally different direction. And we just watched it until it went out of distance. Absolutely bizarre.
Always lights. And what's interesting also, when we look back at mythology, I mean, you look at Disney as well. I know the two seem completely apart, but the cartoons of the fairy lights, all little lights, and these things are now coming to fruition with people reporting of these lights transforming into entities, any kind of thing. I remembered a case in the US of a gentleman driving in his car. I can't remember where it was, what state it was, but it's driving along, and this light was following him, and it, I think, accelerated past his car, and then this man appeared on one side of the road. Then it changed to the light again, went across, and changed back into it. Do you remember it? And he kept thinking, what the hell did I just see? And he kept trying to, of course, it's rationalizing. He even went back. Nothing. These lights, very interesting, that, Chris, very interesting.
That was a small story, and I did. That was probably the kind of main story I remembered, that one, because there were like a few who'd seen it. We were just out fishing, and that was back in the day when I was maybe about 18 or 19. We seen that. So that's not really chronologically, you know what I mean? But it was just interesting that it was almost like it knew what we were thinking, and that's the whole kind of
yes,
it was like that.
Oh,
but, I mean. And it was like, I wonder what it does when it's going to hit the star. And it just went a totally opposite direction. There's no satellite that can do that. I mean, it literally just changed speed and changed direction and gone the same speed. It was like an L shape, you know what I mean? So, so funnily enough, so we kind of came out of, so that was kind of some of the stories, and I was just trying to remember stuff in the past and stuff like that. And so when I kind of got into doing the podcast, started in COVID. I mean, because it just during COVID, quite a lot of people did the same thing now. So at the same time, I kind of knew some of my own family stories. This area where I stay has been quite a strong area for having paranormal activity over the years. Like basically, I've got where I stay here. You've got 10 minutes of Falkirk. I mean, Falkirk says so, Falkirk, Bonnybridge, all that kind of stuff. I mean, so with all these sightings in the past, you've got. I literally could stand at the Bathgate Hills or just here. You've got the whole kind of Bob Taylor thing, incident that happened, the abduction type thing that happened in Livingston back in 79. That was basically for here. That's literally 8 miles away. You've got a few UFO kind of things that happened in Armadale in 94. And there's a few earlier ones in that. You had the A70 encounter with the abduction. Which is another that's like 17 miles like that way. I mean, there's loads of stuff that happened. I mean, about this area throughout the years, and that's probably what kind of kept the interest as well. I mean, so some of the ones that I'd looked at where they start the podcast, and I mean, so I know there was a story where. That had been covered in the past with some investigators at the time, but I knew the guy. I knew who he was. He was the same age as my sisters. He stayed around the corner for me. So I knew back in the day, people had looked at the story because it was quite a prominent story. It was a guy called Andrew Swan. And he basically, interesting story. He basically had seen a black triangular craft in the town of Armadale. So this was literally like it would have been a mile from the old house where he'd seen it. All right, roughly a mile and a half, roughly. So he came home from, I think they were doing, it was like car racing or something like that, whatever it was. He was out kind of seeing it. And then he came back at night. It was a lightning storm. I'm not going into mega detail, but I'll tell you roughly the story. So he had a lightning storm, and it was a kind of a late August night during the summer. So it was still quite light. This is maybe about 10:30 at night or something. And there was a lightning storm happening. So he went up to the playing fields next to the school to get a better view the lightning storm. And he could see something in the distance. He could see like at the time it looked like it looked like a black rectangular type thing or a black object. And it was said it was coming closer. And he thought it was going to actually come down. He actually thought it was a plane to start off with. Then he could see it was more kind of, it was just like an oblong kind of rectangular shape. And he thought it was going to come and land in the field, but it kind of it hovered a bit further away. So he drove his car out the town to the next town and drove up the adjacent like kind of farm road that runs maybe about a mile and a half parallel with this kind of main road, or where the academy is, where the actual school was. So he drives up there, he's driving up and can't see it, it's disappeared. But he gets to this section, basically he's driving along the road, and this thing comes across the top of his car, about 15 foot above his car, right? And it travels going quite slow over the top of his car. He actually thought it's going to hit his roof. It's only like 15 foot, and he's like that. Yeah. So he pulls over, and this thing stops in the adjacent field about 100 feet from him. And it hovers, it's just hovering silently about 15 feet above the ground, right? In like a farmer's field. So what he described was, he said, so there was drones he'd done in the past, but he said the drones weren't accurate to a certain extent, but he said they looked kind of like the drones that were done in the past. But he said, if you've got a Toblerone, see the sweet Toblerone, like the chocolate.
Oh, yes.
Right? So if you've got the prism shape, you know what I mean? So if you can imagine the Toblerone with the point down the way, so you've got it flat, the bar flat, and you've got the point facing down the way, right?
Yeah.
The front of it had a point on it, kind of rounded edges. The back was slightly splayed out, so it was wider at the back. It was about 15 feet high, and it was about 40 foot long. So just hovered there, total black. And so he's seen this thing, and it was like there. He said it was still light enough you could see it. And it was just sitting there, hovered, right? So this was 94. So it was getting a wee bit darker. He watched this thing for about 20 minutes, right? He got into his car, and he had a halogen light in his car, and he plugged in the cigarette lighter, and he shone it on it. And as soon as he'd done that, his light blew. Right?
Oh my God.
Got off right, jumped in his car, tried to start his car, and his car wouldn't start. Right? So this time he's really scared now. Right? So he phones the police. And they said, right, we'll come. I mean, so they're taking a bit of time, the police. And the thing's still there.
Oh,
right?
my Lord. My goodness.
Still there. So the police are taking a bit of time. He phones them again, and his mobile phone, and they say they tell them what road he's on. And they're on the adjacent road, the one further up for the main town. He says, no, I'm at the farm road, the one at the back. So you can see the blue lights of the police coming, right, along the road, like maybe like a mile or so along the road. They say this thing just backs out the way it came in. And then it just shot off really, really fast, right? So the police come, they turn up, there's about 4 police cars turn up. Right? And they've actually got with them, they've got like, so they get him in one car, and they're talking to him and interviewing him and stuff like that, and they can tell he's been drinking and anything like that. They don't even breathalyse him, because they can tell that he's been drinking like that.
Yeah.
They say the police must have picked up like the superintendent or the sergeant or whatever, because at his house, because he was in the car with his slippers on. Because he was like the main guy who was asking, had his slippers on, and he was asking them questions and stuff like that, and they seemed to believe him. And so they're asking him all the questions about what he's seen, what the kind of what it looked like, and all that kind of stuff. And he said the funny thing was, there's a police car in front of me, and one of the guys out of the car jumped the fence, and they put a traffic cone where this thing was sitting. Because I never told him where it was. They said so they must have seen it. They said they
Yeah.
must have seen it, but they said
Yeah.
they didn't. But so his car didn't start. He had to get the AA, take his car home with the REC. Can't remember what one. They did that. They got him home, and then and he went back out. He went back out because he said his window was down. His electric window in his car, and it was down. So he was going to go and cover it with a bit of plastic to save it for the weather, the rain or something like that. And then so he went back out and he heard these. Remember, he used to get the alarms years ago. We used to chirp. It was like,
yes. Yeah.
and so he went and started his car, and his car started. So basically, just came back on again. So the AA actually came out and done an investigation with his car, and they tested it, all that kind of stuff, and they couldn't find nothing. And they just said, well, if that's probably happened to it, it's probably been a high electromagnetic field that's cut it out.
Yes.
Were you next to some major power lines or anything like that? No, there's nothing up there like that. One bit of the story he never relayed, though, when it got looked at in the past, is when he went to bed that night, he had a dream that he went inside it. He went inside the craft. Right? He didn't see any occupants or nothing like that, but he had a dream he went inside the craft, and he could maybe like see like lights and stuff like that, and just stuff inside the craft. But that was it. That's as far as he could remember. And the interesting thing was as well, when it got investigated back in the day, they had quite a lot of like buzz about the story. Then it kind of went dead, kind of thing. But they had like folk from Japan over and things like that, like the documentaries and all that kind of stuff. And they basically got the transcripts of the police, and the transcripts of the police were when he made the call and all that kind of stuff. And the calls went in something like, or the police turned up something like 2:30. And he said, that can't be right, that must be wrong. Because I was only up there like 20 minutes or like 30 minutes tops. And I was up there for like 11:15, 11 o'clock or something like that. Police didn't turn up till 2:30 or something. So he reckons he lost about an hour and a half.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
So
yes.
really interesting story. And it's like it literally happened like a mile and a half from my house with this thing. And so the interesting thing was, and after that, he told me, I've seen things. He stays up there now next to where he'd actually seen this thing. And he said, we've seen things recently. It was in the same area. We've seen like a large white sphere type thing with a light going round about it. In that area, there's a flight path there, so people know what planes look like. This thing was really, really bright. He sent me the video of it, but it's just another light in the sky, but a really, really bright light in the sky. And it's moving like it's moving kind of like south to kind of northeast direction. So you're seeing it moving through the sky. Really, really bright light. So if there's a plane, you're going to see a plane coming towards me with a bright light, no going to the side. Yeah. So this thing's really, really bright light, going travelling to the side, and it's got like you just see like flashing lights and that. But you see him talking about it, and he's going on his phone, but it's just another light in the sky, you know what I mean? But it was prominent enough for them to video it and all that kind of stuff at the time. And that wasn't that long ago. And he said he's seen other things since up there, as in like other type of, I think he'd seen like a blue orb or something. I'm sure he said that. You remember that. Let me go back to the podcast and remember it. But on that story, he put that out, and that's when I had the neighbour call me, not call me, but message me on Facebook about a UFO sighting. And it's synchronicity here it happened because like she basically called me and said, this nothing to do with like that kind of story, but she said
right.
podcast, and she said, I've seen it was I think it was like an orange orb type light flying erratically at angles and stuff like that in the same area. So she's looking up from where I used to stay towards this area. So it was in that area. She's seen it flying erratically. Quite recent times. And that's when I contacted her, I asked her about the black thing in the house. I said,
right,
you know the story, and she knew the story. So I kind of got that story off her and got the other story. So quite interesting though. I mean, it was like and how it ties in as well. Just a bit of synchronicity that she called about that, and then I was actually trying to find out more about the story, and I hadn't heard her for years. And I was like, I'm going to ask her about the black thing in the house.
You know,
that gentleman who lost an hour and 20 minutes, didn't you? She said. He said it couldn't possibly be the time, so he's lost time in Italy from the triangular ship, that thing that was seen.
I think it's fascinating. I mean, we are now coming to the end of the show.
It goes so quick, doesn't it?
But I have been enthralled by your experiences, and it is clear to see, Chris, I think, that although, and I think perhaps, thinking about this in the way that we do, that you as the participant, and not only as the observer, but also the participant, you'll find that these synchronicities, happen quite a lot. And then you get mixed up with other people and you are obviously ostensibly in the nest of the activity that's going on. But it's just fascinating to know, about your life, about how this all started, and also about where you are now, which is incredible. And I have to thank you, both Wally and I, for sharing those most intimate and very interesting experiences and encounters that you've had, and also that you've relayed. I'm always very grateful because, when someone is talking to you about these things, it's very personal, to the individual themselves. It's very unique. And, it carries a lot of weight and passion and drive and, conviction as well, because this is what this is all about.
Well, Chris is right, because when we were younger, when we had seen these things, you couldn't talk about it back then, really. No. It was taboo, wasn't it? It was really, people take the mickey out of it. But it's funny, isn't it? It's like you can't leave it. Once you've been touched by this, it will just fester, and the curiosity gets the better of you. And later on, because it's now more widely acceptable as a whole, now the subject, people are not laughing about it, it's not taboo anymore, it's a bit more comfortable because we can reach out to like-minded souls and share experiences, which I think is wonderful. And thank you so much for sharing them. They were fascinating.
So, Chris, we've got to ask, how can people get hold of you, please, Chris? How can they get hold of you?
So you can find me on Facebook, Podbean, all basically podcasting sites like iTunes and stuff like that. It's Scottish Paranormal Podcast. You can get me at scottishparanormalpodcast@gmail.com. Find me on Facebook under the same name, under Twitter as well, under the same name. All social media channels you can contact me by as well.
And are you writing a book, Chris?
No. not yet.
We try and seed someone's mind because they have so much information. I think that might be something perhaps in the future that you would want to do too, because it's fascinating. And we have to thank you so much.
Yes, and also it's helped us because it puts pieces together with the dark mass that was reported. I'm so pleased this has come up because this is mentioned just recently.
And it's the light that followed you. I mean, if that was me, I would have been taking tracks.
That is spooky. That's really
that's
spooky.
Just something incredibly strange. And of course, it's all very well relaying it, but what are the listeners? Your listeners will understand is that when you are in that experience, because you're a down to earth guy, you've got your head on your shoulders. Right from wrong, what's what. But that, I mean, just one more question. Did that spook you at all when that was happening? Were you spooked in any way with it?
In regards to
the light that was following you when you were taking that?
That did. At the time, I didn't until I actually stopped and I couldn't see it. And I kind of thought there was something strange about it. So I ran to the next town and I ran the street lights back. I'll give you one more thing, which is just before we head off, right? So going back to the story where I had the kind of Oz factor, right?
Oh, yes.
One of the first podcasts I'd done was a guy who had seen some type of creature called the Silverman, right? Which was in the Bathgate Hills, which was, it was like a bulky type thing. It looked like it described like a negative. It looked like a negative.
Yeah.
It ran, it got out these lights, his cat ran, whole family seen it. And it's a story called the Silverman. When I went and looked at that, it was 100 meters from the spot where I had the Oz factor.
Oh my God!
It's ironic, isn't it?
Oh God, I don't think I'll sleep at night.
Weird.
But thank you so much, Chris, for coming on board and to remind our listeners that
you can hear Chris's a Scottish Paranormal podcast. He's just recently interviewed Preston Dennett as well.
That's correct. Yes, I've seen that. And we have to thank you so much for coming on board. And that just leaves for me and Monty to say to you all to thank you, Chris, and also to keep safe and watch the stars. You've been listening to Twin Souls on the Paranormal UK Radio Network.